TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
And you get a sense of where he's going. He's not really interviewing them about the technical aspects that he wants them to understand about submarines and nuclear technology. If there's an English major, he's asking them, tell me about Chaucer. What do you really know about him? John Donne, explain him. What century did he live in?
Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, I hope all is well with you today. It is another beautiful day here in North Carolina, and this episode is brought to you by our sponsors, Ignite Management Services and Liberty Strength. These sponsors help me bring these shows to you each and every week, so I encourage you to click on their links below and check them out. Also, I want to remind you that the Qualified Leadership Book Series, which includes all three of my best-selling leadership books, is now available on my website, johnsrennie.com. You get all three books for 15% off the Amazon and Barnes & Noble price, but this offer is only available on my website. Now, this is the perfect Christmas gift for the leader or future leader in your family. So check it out at johnsrennie.com. Well, that is it. Today we have a very special episode. We're going to be talking about the life and leadership of one of the most influential naval officers in American history, a man who is the father of the nuclear navy, Admiral Hyman G. Rickover. And my guest is Dr. Claude Berube. Claude's new book, Rickover Uncensored, provides a new look at the life of this incredible leader. Claude had access to Rickover's personal files and gives us a unique look at his life. Often the best way to learn leadership is to look at the lives of great leaders like Rickover. I love this discussion, and I know you will as well. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership. Leadership is a people business. That's the philosophy of your podcast host, John Rennie. As a former Cold War submarine officer who spent 20 plus years leading businesses in corporate America before starting his own manufacturing business, he knows that leadership matters. Are you ready for some real-world actionable advice from John as well as his expert guests?
I'm ready.
The show starts right now.
Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Claude Berube. Claude wrote his doctoral dissertation on the Navy during Andrew Jackson's presidency, which became the book On Wide Seas. He has worked on political campaigns as an analyst and team leader at the Office of Naval Intelligence, as a national security fellow in the U.S. Senate, and as a defense contractor for the Naval Sea Systems Command and the Office of Naval Research. He is concluding nearly 20 years of teaching at the U.S. Naval Academy. He retired as a commander from the U.S. Navy Reserves, where he was an intelligence officer. His third novel, The Philippine Pact, came out earlier this year, and his fifth nonfiction book, Rickover Uncensored, is now available. And I'm excited to have him on the show to talk about the life and leadership of Admiral Hyman G. Rickover, a man who had a tremendous impact on the U.S. submarine force. So, Claude, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your having me on.
Well, I am honored to have you and to learn more about Admiral Rickover, because he certainly was a man that had a lot of influence in our country, and especially the nuclear navy and the submarine force of which I served. So I'm always interested in learning more about him and how he was so successful in his career, yet, he had some challenges as well, which we're going to hear about. So Rickover is probably one of the most best-known admiral in our history. But for those who may not know much about him, tell us a little bit about his life and his influence on the Navy.
Hyman Rickover, I think, is one of the great American success stories, especially in terms of national security. He grew up in much poverty in Poland, or what is today Poland. He recounts the travels that his mother and his sister and he took when they were very young to get to a port in order to meet up with their father, who was here in the United States, who had preceded them. He recounts the fact that he only saw an orange once a year when his mother could afford one on special occasions. He recounts seeing Cossacks, Russian Cossacks, tapping at their cart as they're trying to get to the port at the conclusion of the Russo-Japanese War. He ends up in Chicago and works as sending telegrams, anything he could do for work, and eventually gets an opportunity to go to the U.S. Naval Academy, enters in 1918, and graduates in 1922. He serves in surface Navy ships, surprisingly, for the first decade or so, about decade and a half. Finally, permanently goes to the submarine community. He commands a ship during 1937, in which he's in Shanghai, and he's recounting the Japanese invasion force coming into China, and provides incredibly detailed information on those. During World War II, he's assigned by and large to Pearl Harbor to try to rebuild the fleet. And after after World War II, he's assigned to this new nuclear or atomic energy program as a Navy captain. And he would eventually become the head of naval reactors. He would serve for about 35, 40 years in that capacity, finally retiring or being forced to retire in 1982. He reaches a 4-star admiral level, which is extremely significant. We can talk about how he got there a little later on. But I don't think, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, that we would not have had the nuclear program or the safety record that we had without Hyman G. Rickover, an incredibly popular person among the American public, but also internationally throughout his life, especially since the USS Nautilus, the first U.S. submarine that was nuclear powered, got underway. He's one of the few admirals in the post-war environment to grace the cover of Time magazine. There were thousands and thousands of fan mail letters to him from across the country and around the world, something you don't have today. So I think he probably did more for the Navy in the 20th century, particularly during peacetime, than any other flag officer.
Yeah, so he's an interesting character because, a lot of times we hear about captains, admirals, their wartime records, they're leading a group in battle or what have you, and the heroics around it. He was a man that shaped the Navy and actually how it was built and how it went to war, how it built its ships, how it built its submarines. You mentioned the nuclear power program, how he created essentially the nuclear power program. So that's he's known for his influence on the Navy and the world versus just his heroics in battle, which is very interesting. So I think that's one thing that's interesting about him.
No, you're absolutely correct. I can think of only perhaps one other admiral that might have been John Dahlgren during the 19th century, whose career was largely defined by the development of certain weapons rather than his service during the Civil War, which was brief and comparatively undistinguished when we're looking at other admirals. But no, I think it's tough to find an admiral like Hyman G. Rickover who would have had this effect without having been, and I shudder to say, not a combat vet, because he was in a combat area simply due to the nature of World War II, but also prior to World War II or our entry into it when he was in Shanghai, when things could have taken a very different turn very quickly.
Yes, absolutely. So, there's been a lot of, as you mentioned, we talked about before we started press record, there's been a lot of biographies written about Admiral Rickover. And so we get a sense of who he was from those biographies. But your book is different. And so tell us a little bit about what makes this book different.
Several years ago, I had an opportunity to meet Eleanor Rickover, his second wife. He had met her when he was recovering from surgery at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And she was a lieutenant commander, a Navy nurse. And I asked her, well, how did you meet the admiral? And she said, well, I walked into his room one day and he had all these newspapers thrown about all over the room. And I yelled at him, told him to clean them up immediately. And then the next time I came in, it was cleaned up and he asked me on a date. So that was it. I think he had a great deal of respect for somebody who would stand up to him.
Yes.
So I got to know her, and she eventually asked if she might be able to donate a lot of the admiral's items to the Naval Academy Museum, where I currently head. And certainly that we had received things before, but his Congressional Gold Medal, some uniforms, that were part of this, but I think most importantly, this collection of what became 250 archival boxes worth of letters, memoranda for the record, transcripts of telephone conversations, and other documents that really shed light. So as a historian, when I took a look at this, I had to make a decision. I thought I was going to write another biography, but then it was about 7 months in total that I looked at this, and I'd say about 3 or 4 months into it, I saw a note where Rickover is talking about the papers in his condominium and how he doesn't want another biography written of him, and he hopes that maybe someday somebody will just use the papers so people will understand him. That's when I knew that as a historian, my role was not to interpret everything. I certainly did with about a 3,000-word introductory essay. But more importantly, to select what I thought was important from those tens of thousands of documents and try to condense his life through his words in about 500 pages. I think there's a lot more work to be done, quite frankly. I think there's probably 8 to 10 more books that could be written simply on this collection, which I think is really important. Nobody's ever seen it before except for his official biographer. But by the same token, I saw the contract with the gentleman, Dr. Francis Duncan, from several decades ago, and it said, "You may see this material, but I must approve anything you write." So Rickover was very attentive to his own message and formulating the public persona about him. And consequently, that's why I thought Rickover Uncensored would be an appropriate title for this, because for the first time, he's able to express himself. People are able to see the love letters between Rickover and his first wife in the 1930s, which shed incredible light on a different aspect of this man, and other memos that he's sending out that dispel some myths, but also confirm some of the stories that have been generating about him for decades.
So as you look at it, so we have this, public view of Rickover being, he was a tough guy, right? He, the stories. So I came into the nuclear Navy after Rickover, but had already left. But there was many officers I served with who had been through those interviews with Rickover, and he was really tough, especially on officers coming into his naval nuclear program. It was his program, and he made sure people knew that he was tough. He was direct. He was a force of nature. He got things done. So what were some of the surprises you found as you look through, these 250 boxes of information about his life, which, like you said, include even love letters and what have you. So what were some surprises that you found when you went through this?
Well, first, you mentioned or referred to the interviews, the famous interviews of midshipmen, both ROTC and Naval Academy, which could be brutal.
Yes.
But you had always just heard the stories from those who had experienced it. I came across a number of transcriptions of those interviews.
Wow.
I couldn't believe that what I was seeing, because here we had, for the first time, confirmation, because as an intelligence officer, you always try to get 2 different sources. Well, here was the famous second source. So there are at least about a dozen of those. And you get a sense of where he's going. He's not really interviewing them about the technical aspects that he wants them to understand about submarines and nuclear technology. If there's an English major, he's asking them, tell me about Chaucer. What do you really know about him? John Donne, explain him. What century did he live in? If they were history majors or if they were Catholic, he'd do a deep dive into Catholicism and the concepts behind it. And what I learned after a while is he was really looking for how people could think and understand different concepts and absorb information. And he said himself in one of the notes that I can send anybody to nuke school. I can't send anyone to think. And that's why I think he was stressing that. The surprises. First, the love letters to his first wife, Ruth, were absolutely amazing. They were daily from 1929 to 1940.
Wow.
There's the typical, I feel like I'm in a forest as the waterfall is coming down. The typical young folks in love. But also half of those, he talked about that for a while. And then he discuss a book or an opera that they had both seen independently. They're talking about Russian books. They're talking about Mein Kampf early on and having a discussion. Ruth had been German, or her parents were from Germany. So you get a sense of Rickover letting his guard down and his support very early on for women. He talks about that, I am not equal to this woman. She is far superior to me. But he's talking about not only equality for women, but equality for and compassion for the poor. And I think it's because he came from that. An example of that is when he's in Shanghai and he's off the ship walking through the streets and he sees a very destitute person and he tells Ruth, all I had were a few coins, but that's all I could give him, and try to hold him in what probably were going to be his final days. There was a remarkable letter that he received and that he sent later on, around 1979, to a young 9-year-old boy in California. His first name was Hyman, and he wrote to Admiral Rickover saying, my mother said, you're an admiral in the Navy and you help build ships, and your first name is Hyman. Do you get angry too when people make fun of your first name? Rickover didn't always reply to the letters, but in this case he did. And he talks about, well, here's, in the Jewish faith, here is the background for the name. Here's what it means. And it's a very empathetic letter, but I think most importantly in this letter, of all the tens of thousands of letters and memos I saw from Rickover, everything was signed H.G. Rickover. In this case, it was signed Hyman G. Rickover. And I think it was a way for him to show this young man that, yes, I'm an admiral and this is my name and I'm very proud of it and you should be too. Those were two of the surprises. There were others where he's talking about his long-time staff, both the engineers and the administrative staff, who had been with him for 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. This sense of loyalty that you wouldn't really imagine, because you keep thinking, because he was so mean and cantankerous from all these stories, that these people would just be by the wayside every year or two. They would want somebody else to come in. Instead, he engendered a great deal of loyalty from his staff. The humor, I think, it was a great surprise. The memos to his staff around Christmas time, or even some of the things he would say directly to U.S. senators at the beginning of a hearing and crack them all up. You don't think of Rickover as a funny individual in terms of humor. And so those are just some of the things that I was able to deduce from the man in these letters and these memos. Certainly there is the side, the cantankerous side, the acerbic side, but he's a very driven individual. And at one point makes the comment toward the end of his career, my work has been my life, and you need to have a mission in life, and this has been mine. And that's why I only took 4.5 days off of annual leave or vacation every year since I became a commissioned officer. So those are some of the things that you would see in these letters.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
As a leader, you're responsible for the mission and the people assigned to you. Regardless of the size of your team, employees are depending on you for their lives and careers. For the sake of your team and the people who entrust you with this role, you need to master the skills to become a great leader. Best-selling leadership author John Rennie is proud to introduce the Qualified Leadership book series. This new series teaches you how to become a people-centered leader. Great leaders know that employees who are respected, appreciated, and allowed to grow will go the extra mile. These books provide real-world leadership wisdom written from a hands-on perspective. If you want to be a more effective leader, this is the one book series you should read this year. This 3-book series contains the following best-selling leadership books: I Have the Watch, You Have the Watch, and All in the Same Boat for one low price of $39.99. Begin your journey to become a leader worth following. Go to johnsrennie.com and get your order in today.
This episode is brought to you by Ignite Management Services. Ignite is led by Mike Watson, who you might remember from episode 137. Mike and his team believe that everything starts with leadership, whether it's strategy execution or cultural transformation. It's the role of the leader to create the conditions for their people to succeed. The team at Ignite can help you develop critical habits to enhance your leadership capability and transform your business. Ignite Management is now offering the Resilient Leadership Assessment Tool. This is an online questionnaire designed to assess and guide leadership development, coaching, and team building. It provides leaders an opportunity to gain insights into their leadership strengths and development needs. After taking this assessment, you will receive a custom, detailed report that provides practical and actionable recommendations to enhance your effectiveness. I have taken this assessment myself and found it to be extremely valuable in helping me make changes to my leadership approach. Right now, Ignite is offering 15% off the price of this tool to the deep leadership audience. Go to ignitemanagement.ca and enter the code START15 at checkout to get started today. This episode is brought to you by Jeremy Clevenger at Liberty Strength. As a high-performing leader, you know that leadership isn't about telling people what to do, it's about leading by example. And for most people, the one area that they are lacking when it comes to leading by example is their health and fitness. By improving your health and fitness, every other area of your life improves. Your energy skyrockets, your sleep improves, your confidence increases, and more. But how can you get and stay fit as a busy leader? Well, you do what you've always done. You hire the best people for the job. Don't struggle on your own. Put Liberty Strength in your corner. Jeremy and his team will work with you to take your physique, mindset, nutritional habits, and more to the next level with his step-by-step, all-inclusive coaching program. I've worked with Liberty Strength for the past 2 years, and I'm in the best shape of my life, and I'm still hitting strength personal records at 56 years old. If you want to step up your game, reach out to Jeremy at libertystrengthtx.com to find out more and get your initial consultation scheduled with him today. Do you think, did you get a sense that his immigrant background, his growing up poor, was that some of the fuel that drove him throughout his career? You know, because I know you see that a lot with entrepreneurs. You'll see, immigrant entrepreneurs tend to have this just never quit kind of attitude. And I wonder if some of that was in him, and you maybe saw that through the papers.
Absolutely. First, I don't think Rickover would have allowed anyone to outwork him. He understood what it meant to earn a dollar and how hard he used to have to work for that dollar when he was growing up. Second, he gave back in an incredible way. Every book and every speech he made, he took that money and donated it to charity. And I saw the receipts to the various organizations, and a lot of them were to orphan organizations, to collectives who were destitute, anything that he could help raise up individuals. That's why he always fought the elites, whether they were the elites of the Navy or the elites of corporate America. He wasn't afraid to challenge them. But by the same token, he had the ability to challenge them for a couple of reasons. First, he was in his position for decades. Second, most importantly, he was in that position for decades and he could do what he wanted to do because of his relationship to Congress. He became friends with some key members who became senators and also stayed in the House, people like Henry Scoop Jackson. And they were the ones who got the Navy to change their minds, if you will, about his promotion. He didn't make admiral. There are some great letters from a young Jack Kennedy, Senator Jack Kennedy, asking the Navy, what is the problem? Why can't it promote at Hyman G. Rickover? And they demanded that another board be conducted to revisit the candidates. So he's able to make 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star because of Congress, but also because of the presidents. He had a great relationship with Nixon, for example, that stemmed from a trip that they took to the Soviet Union to look at some Soviet warships. He had a fantastic relationship, obviously, with Jimmy Carter, who wrote to him early on. He was still governor of Georgia at the time, and said, "Admiral, I just want to let you know I'm running for president in 1976, and I'd like your support." And there's this whole correspondence between the two individuals. So I don't think anybody could have challenged Rickover in that way because of the power he held. In fact, what you see in one of the memos that's sent to him is that there is a meeting of admirals in Monterey in the late 1960s, early 70s. And one of them, they're discussing the Rickover problem. Of all the problems that they have in the Navy, they're focused on the Rickover problem. And finally, one just says, look, he's got the friendship of the House and the Senate, and we just better get along with him because there's nothing we can change as a result.
Yeah. That is an interesting side of that, because I think as leaders, we think we need to take care of ourselves, we need to take care of our people, and everything will be great. But the truth of the matter is we've got to be good at networking and making sure we build relationships with people who can affect the things that we're trying to do in our roles as leaders. And it seems to me, just based on what I've been looking through, is that Rickover had the ability to network, build relationships, and have resources that he could call upon when he needed support for the various things he was doing. He was able to build coalitions. And so when you think of Rickover as this, tough individual, but you're also seeing a side of him as the ability to network and build partnerships and build friendships and long-term friendships.
Yes and no. Okay. Yes, because the networking he did was on Capitol Hill. He would go to private parties. He and Scoop Jackson and their wives would go to plays together. And I'd asked a retired 4-star admiral, did you ever do this when you were in this mission? He goes, no, absolutely not. We would not be allowed to do something like that. But he inserted himself into other programs within the Navy. Now, I think he was obviously very capable based on his prolific reading and analysis of issues. But the other admirals didn't feel comfortable with what he was doing in their own lanes, if you will. And that was his downfall, because by 1981, most of his friends in Congress had either been defeated or had passed away. I mean, again, this is 30 years of relationships on Capitol Hill. And a contemporary of Rickover's, Vice Admiral Bob Monroe, who I've gotten to know, Admiral Monroe, still with us, still sharp, and said, you know what, that was it. He had no supporters by the end. So I think there's also something to be said for leaving when you're at the top of your game. I think if he had left in 1980, in November, with the defeat of Jimmy Carter, I think his reputation would have been even more secure than it is. It would have avoided the problems and the challenges and the relationship he had with Secretary of the Navy John Lehman, for example. Yep. Because by then, Lehman and Reagan and everybody else were realizing that he didn't have his allies around anymore, like Scoop Jackson and the others. But to demonstrate the power that Rickover had as an admiral, as an individual in the Navy, there was one congressman who wanted to see the House Appropriations chairman, and he refused. He didn't want to see anybody. Another congressman said, look, you need to call Rickover and have him make the call to the appropriations chair. Well, sure enough, that congressman said, Admiral, would you please make a call for me? Made the call. And the next day, the appropriations chair saw that congressman just because Rickover asked. And I think that's a very powerful statement. You wouldn't see that today. You wouldn't see somebody who has that lengthy of a tenure. You wouldn't see somebody who has that relationship with members of Congress in which he could circumvent the Navy in many cases.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're essentially getting things done sort of around the backs of other people in their lanes, and so they feel threatened, I would imagine. And so there would have been battles, and he would have had enough people on his side to win those battles, but eventually that support dried up.
Yeah, and by the same token, because of that, Rickover was trusted by the House and the Senate because they knew when he came to testify, he had all of his ducks in a row. There was no question if he said, I'm going to put the ship to sea on January 1st, that ship would be at sea on January 1st, and it would have a great safety record. They trusted him in a way they didn't trust the other flag officers.
Yeah, that makes sense. What would you say some of the things that made Rickover effective as a leader?
His knowledge. People don't realize the depth of information he was able to digest. And again, going back to the 1930s, I started writing a list of the books and the operas and the plays that he's discussing with Ruth. I had to stop after a while because there was simply too many. But it's not just about the Navy. He's learning about all aspects of life, and it's his curiosity, I think, more than anything else, that allows him to be Rickover. It allows him to go in different lanes. And it's quite frankly, the reason why he looked at education and naval education in a way that supported the nuclear Navy. Because he saw, we could have a nuclear Navy, but if we don't have the individuals, not only within the Navy, but beyond in society from whom we can draw, we'll be in trouble. So we need to get thinkers out there. And the way you think is you read and you discuss it. And he gets very frustrated early in his career when the other officers are out playing golf and he's studying hard, either as a midshipman or as a junior officer. But that would serve him well throughout his career. So I think the curiosity and the perseverance, as well as the networking he does with the key policymakers.
Yeah, you definitely see that in him. But it's interesting because a lot of times we talk a lot about leadership characteristics, and one of the most important ones that we sometimes leave out is competence. And that comes with knowledge and being well-read and understand everything about your industry, everything about your situation. And he was, and the way you get there is through curiosity. So I love to see that element of Rickover because he was a curious guy. He was well-learned. He was well-read. But and I saw that, going through nuclear power school, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Still to this day, I'm 56 years old. I've never done anything as hard as that 6 months at nuclear power school. It was boot camp for engineers. I mean, essentially, you come out of university thinking, "Oh, I know a lot, right? I've got a degree. In my case, I had a mechanical engineering degree." And you come in there and you're a nobody, and you have to earn your 6 months. You have to earn graduation, and it was very difficult to do. My roommate was a 4.0 graduate with a nuclear engineering degree from WPI, and he failed out, and I made it through. And it was a very difficult program, but you saw his influence was directly, I could see his influence in nuke power school. One of the hardest things, one of the things I'm most proud of. Even though I served and I was in the Navy and I did all sorts of great things, I got through nuke power school. That's like my big thing. But you definitely saw his influence there when you went through that program. It was very difficult, and there was no days off. There was study time in the evenings, working on the weekends. It was very difficult. So you definitely see his work ethic, his perseverance, and the knowledge that he expected from his people in that program. So it's neat to hear a little bit about him because I definitely saw it in my time at nuke power school. What would you say, like areas where he failed and had some blind spots?
I think he failed in how he treated people oftentimes, and that became the moniker for Rickover, unfortunately. Insulting people. I mean, there are transcripts of telephone conversations he has with reporters, for example, and he is absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
He's short-tempered with them. He's insulting with them. Could he have gone further without it? Oh, I don't know, because he went pretty far.
Yeah.
But I also think that detracted from his abilities and his achievements. That more than anything else. And the second part of that is, I think you have to know when to leave when you're at the top of your game and not when people force you out because you're over the hump.
That makes sense.
Rickover was 82, 83 during this whole process. And he is the oldest flag officer we've ever had, and he's the longest serving naval officer we've ever had. I think he didn't want to leave. He may have known that it was his time. However, based on the letters and the discussions that I'm seeing on the paper during this research, this was his life. And I don't think he knew what to do after. So I think we all face that time. Time is no friend to any of us. At some point, we all have to retire. If we fortunately get that far, we have to know what the next mission is. And I think because he had been so involved in so many aspects over those decades with the nuclear power program, he didn't know what to do next. And I think he was lost. I think if he had thought about that more in the 1970s, about what the next step was, I think he would have come out of it a far different personality and a far different memory than we have of him.
It's interesting too, because what his mission, his life's mission was, deeply impacted the country. And so we talk about having, work-life balance, right? But he had none of that. His work was his life. And because of that, he has such a deep impact on the country. And you wonder if he had a work-life balance, if he would not have had that same effect, I wonder.
I agree with you. And I also have to point out that important relationship with Ruth. She passed away in 1972. And you're reading these letters to his very close few friends, where he said, I never could have been the man today I was without having known Ruth and without her pushing me and our discussions. She was vital to creating the Admiral Rickover that we benefited from. She forced him to think more. She challenged him.
Yeah.
So she became more than more than a romantic interest, but a more fulfilling relationship for what Rickover needed. He needed somebody to challenge his mind, and he had that with Ruth.
That's really interesting too. We've talked about this on this show with having a support network. As leaders, you need to have people you can talk to and privately, but we never really talked too much about the impact a spouse makes on, the career of a leader. In this case, Rickover had an equal, or what he said, even above, but it's someone he could talk to that would challenge him, push him, question him. And I know for me, I've been married 32 years, and my wife has always been that person where I'll bring her an issue up, in mostly relationships at work, and she'll be able to sort things out. Like, oh, this is what's really happening. And I think it's good to have somebody like that in your life that you can bounce ideas off, whether it's a mentor, whether it's someone that you're close to, like a peer. But a spouse can also be that. And it's interesting to hear Rickover having a spouse that helped him.
Absolutely. Well, they met at Columbia, and I think that's important because in 1935 he publishes his first article, and it's on submarine warfare and international relations. Well, when you're looking at the letters going back to 1929, they're discussing international relations and having a discussion about submarine warfare in a way you wouldn't have expected. But Ruth was, I think she was the first woman to earn her PhD in international relations here in the United States. So she had that background that she could educate him, and he benefited from that.
Yeah, so again, leaders who are listening in, this is an interesting element of Rickover that you probably never even heard of, but you hear that his spouse was a big part of about who he was and how he led. And we need to have that support network in place as well. So that interesting observations. Claude, what final message would you like to leave with us about Admiral Rickover and his life?
The reason I did the book as I did, there is no index, by the way. It's the first time I've done that with my books. The reason why is I didn't want somebody to give it what we call the Washington, D.C. read. You look right at the index to see if you or your boss is mentioned in the book. I wanted people to read his life in its totality, unimpeded, if you will, by an intermediary like me. I think what historians do, what we do is very important in interpreting history and basing it on the facts and the research. But in this case, Rickover needed to speak for himself. And that's why I hope this will serve as a primary source and a very interesting read for anybody out there who's interested in learning more about arguably one of our most important admirals in our history.
That's fantastic. And one thing you say that's kind of important is the fact that you've taken primary sources and put it in one document. It also will help for future researchers, I would think, get that information. So that information was not available to the public in the past. Now it is but it also can be a primary source for future researchers. Is that what your hope is too?
That's correct. And keep in mind, this is about 500 pages. There are tens of thousands of documents in this collection. And that's why I hope other historians will also look at Rickover's life from different perspectives. Being a historian, you're not supposed to be the only historian of a topic. You hope that what you do will generate more interest. And I hope they will go to the Nimitz Library at the Naval Academy and do that research.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, because I even think, from my standpoint, I'm working on a doctorate in leadership, so it's not in history, but I see that the fact that there's this primary source out there where if someone were to dig into the leadership side of Rickover and really try to unpack the good, bad, and the ugly of his life, you're going to need some of that information. So it's good to have a place to find that information. So that's fantastic. Claude, this has been fantastic having you on the show. It's certainly an honor, and I'm so glad you did this work. And for me, at least, it's good to be able to learn more about Rickover, and I'm looking forward to reading the book and just unpacking those unusual things you're going to find in the middle of 500 pages. You're going to find something that's going to make you laugh, smile, or go, "Holy cow! I had no idea that he did this." So I appreciate the work that you're doing. How can our listeners find out more about you, this particular book, or all your books that you've written?
Sure. A full list of my books is located at the Authors Guild on my biography page. You can follow me on Twitter, or what used to be called Twitter, at CG Berube, or just go look at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, and you'll see the 8 books that I've written, both fiction and nonfiction.
Fantastic. We're going to put links in the show notes for Claude's resources. And again, I highly encourage, especially I know we've got a lot of veterans listening in, and we got a lot of veteran submariners listening in. So get this book, Rickover Uncensored. You're going to learn a lot about this admiral, this cherished admiral, this person that had such an impact on our world. You're going to get to know a lot more about him in this book. Claude, I really appreciate you taking time out and sharing what you learned through doing the research on Admiral Rickover. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for all you do.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. For more information and updates, please visit our website at www.deepleadershippodcast.com or johnsrennie.com. Until next time, take care.
If you're a working professional wondering what's next for your career, you've come to the right place. Whether you're looking for a promotion, growth, or a potential career transition, look no further. With over 30 years working in a variety of industries, I share my insider knowledge with those ready to get ahead on Career Advancement with Craig Ansell. Tune in to get your strategies for success.
Are you passionate about saving the planet for future generations? Do you want to learn how to do it? If yes, then you need to tune in to the Nature Pact podcast. It's a talk show covering the changing world around us, from renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, circular economy, to ESG and social innovation. Don't miss this opportunity to discover how you can join the movement and make a difference. Subscribe to the Nature Pact podcast today on your favorite platform and get ready to be amazed.